Welcome to the 101 Ways podcast. 101 Ways is a product delivery consultancy, and this is us giving back to the tech community. With 101 ways to solve any problem, we hope that here you will find the expertise to solve yours, or at least some inspiration when solving yours. Of course, you can follow us on Spotify and also on our YouTube channel. So this is a team takeover episode where a couple of the team debate a topic. And today, I'm Ollie Happy. I'm product principal at 101 Ways. And this is Jon Parish, who is our engineering principal. Welcome, Jon.
Hello.
So today we're going to be exploring the real world use cases for AI. Today's real world use cases for AI. So let's start with you, Jon. Perhaps a quick introduction.
Hi, I'm Jon Parish. I'm a principal engineer, as Ollie said. I've been with 101 Ways for about 5 years now, doing all sorts of software, including a lot of data analysis and quite a lot of AI investigations for the consultancy.
It is the theme of the moment. What can we do with AI? So our purpose today is to give you an overview of today, not tomorrow's, real world use cases. So how can the suite of data and AI software and tooling packages be used to apply to your business and challenges that you might have? So let's kick things off at the beginning. What do we mean when we say AI?
So AI is a very broad term, and it's used quite heavily at the moment. But at its base, it's the entire field of study of anything to do with machine intelligence. So anytime you might be asking a computer to classify something, recognize something, make a decision, you could argue that's a particular case of AI. A good example that's on old tech rather than fancy neural networks, but I consider to be AI, would be a recommendation graph. So when Spotify or Netflix recommends something that you like, that's not necessarily built on some deep trained neural network, but a lot of the time it's just a graph, a recommendation graph that collects information about music that's often liked in groups. And I'd still argue that that is machine intelligence.
And those have been around for a while, haven't they?
Absolutely.
I don't know how I would get by watching Netflix without the recommendation. There's just too much content. Cool. All right. So next up, let's think about where this comes from. So what would be a potted history of where data and AI tech comes from?
So it's like with many histories, I guess when you dig into it, it actually goes further back than most people realize. So the concept of an artificial neural network was actually invented in 1943. Famously, the perceptron. There was a paper in 1943 that described it, and the first hardware version of that. This was a very, very simple. I mean, our data, we'd even consider it a neural network in the sense that we do now, but it was the same design concept. The very first hardware implementation of that was built in 1957. Obviously, back then they were very limited because they had extremely limited compute power and they had extremely limited storage, so not much data to train things on. And that perceptron, although it was using a real neural network, it was just a simple binary classifier. After that, it was of some academic interest, but of no commercial interest because it wasn't of much great value. And through the 1970s and 1980s, they had what some people called the AI winter, where there was basically no research done on the subject at all. It
Right.
was a very sort of academic edge case. But as we got through into the 90s and into the new millennium, as storage capacity grew and compute power grew, there became more and more interest in it. And especially after sort of 2010, when the amount of storage and amount of compute power was much more generally available, the academic interest in it grew massively, and that led into commercial usage. TensorFlow from Google, one of the main, or one of the biggest, far from the only, but one of the biggest machine learning libraries that people often use, was launched in 2015. And that's probably, oh, it's not the only indicator. That's probably a good indicator when it went sort of mainstream. Um, and
So coming up on 10 years in mainstream, and I guess that probably explains why to a lot of people it feels like it's come out of nowhere.
yeah,
And perhaps that's just
absolutely.
because under this naming, it's only been around for 10 years.
Yeah. And obviously throughout the sort of over the last sort of that 10 years and the 10 years prior in academia, there was a lot of rapid development. So we went from basic neural networks, they sort of evolved into different types of neural networks. People started adding memory. There was an evolution called long short-term memory, which helped with contextual awareness, and there were several iterations on that. And another tipping point happened in 2017 when the current endpoint, where we are today on that path of sort of context within sequential data, was a paper called "Attention is All You Need," which introduced the concept of transformers. That was in 2017, and that is the neural network model that almost all of the current large language models like ChatGPT use. Obviously, language or any written or spoken is sequential data. There's a string of words together, and that context helps the neural network understand the semantic meaning of whole sentences rather than just words, which is why it's so effective at natural language comprehension.
Right, right. And as I understand it, transformers also introduce the concept of processing in parallel. Is that right?
So yeah, so there was a couple of sort of architectural optimizations in the transformer. One of which was optimizing the way it did that historical context. So that was both handling that in parallel and also filtering out the non-important bits, i.e., the attention rather than just memory, so it could focus in on the key bits. If I say the dog ran after the ball, the in that sentence isn't really important. In fact, of those 7 or 8 words, dog after ball is the things that you really gives you the importance, and it was just a way to optimize that sort of attention.
Yeah, yeah. And very similar to the way that I listen to your sentence, isn't it? Which is
Yeah.
quite cool. Okay, thank you. Right. So that gets us up to today where folks will say we need to look at how AI could be put to benefit in our business. All right. So let's look at how that's happening. We've got a list of use cases that you've kindly prepared that have relevance today at today's level of technology rather than tomorrow's. So let's start at the beginning. What is the first use case?
So if you're going to bring in any of this technology for yourself, and I'm in this case, I'm speaking more specifically about making your own machine learning. That's sort of a specialist, if you will, for your business and your area. There is a case of using a generic third party like ChatGPT, which I think we'll go on to later. But if you're going to have a specialist thing for your business, then you need to start out with data. There's 2 things that any machine learning needs. It needs compute power and it needs data to train on. Without the data, it's not going to get anywhere at all. So the foundations of the data are absolutely vital, and that's collecting data and storing it, but not just storing it, classifying it. Anyone who's had a computer with a large hard drive for a while, when they know when they come to move to the next one and they look through all their old documents and photos and they're all in 15 different directories, it's an absolute nightmare to work out what's of value if you're not very disciplined in how you file things. Now, if you imagine that 10,000 times worse because your data's been collected, your company's been collecting data and metrics about your internal operations, sales, and everything else for 10 years, you need to make sure that you've got a clean data pipeline. Generally speaking, it's not always possible, but where it's possible, I will assert it's always easier to do data cleaning and validation, make sure your data is correct at the point of ingestion, so that once it's stored, you can be confident with it, and you've got enough metadata stored with it to know the context of that data, if it has any, if some data has a time of validity, so you know when you can age it out if it is something that has a time of validity. And so yes, building that not just storing the data. There's a temptation because storage is so cheap these days that as long as you caught it, you can worry about analyzing it later. To a
Mm.
degree, that's true, but don't underestimate that after analysis will be much harder if you do it after the fact than if you can do it at point of ingestion. So I'd always recommend a strong data pipeline to make sure you are analyzing it at point of ingestion and storing it in the cleanest way for the future.
Mm. Okay, thank you. That makes sense. All right. So, and then thinking about the next use case, once that foundation is in place, what are we seeing the most of?
So once you've got data, and most companies, even if they haven't got an explicit data pipeline, these days storage is so cheap. Almost every company's got logs of some sort or another, even if it is only in inverted commas usage on the website. They'll just from the web server logging, what the busiest times are and everything else. So and there's always going to be a lot of value there, whether or not it's used. And in many ways, this is often a quick win for companies because it's literally data they've already got. And so starting to dig into that, you can to stick with the web server example, you can figure out which pages or which products are most viewed, even if they're not most purchased, and it can really give you an insight into where you might be able to make improvements to sell more, or at least improve customer satisfaction. Um, Now, there's a phrase that's called being data driven. That's often spoken about in this sort of context. Being You need to have the understanding of the data, and you can do it relatively cheaply with the data you've already got. And that's a necessary foundation to be data driven. But the other side of it is as well is that it's both technology led and sort of attitude led, because you also need to be led by the data. So if the data implies that this product, which might be your chief designer's favorite, isn't actually selling well in its current form, the data says you need to do that, and then you need to make a choice as to which way you go.
Mm.
So being data led, so to really get the value from the data, you need to both unlock it, you need to understand what the data means, but then you need to let that data influence your decisions. It doesn't need to take over, but there's a mid ground between just having the data parked somewhere that only the server admins use,
Mm.
and having no vision other than what's led in the data, and the sweet spot's in the middle somewhere.
Yes.
Uh, so yeah, whether you use the term data driven or data informed or whatever else, but it can give you insights as to how things are going and where improvements could be made.
Right, right. So start with the data that you've already got. And the example that comes to mind quite often is, in my mind, is when Gmail was first introduced by Google.
Yeah,
And I remember that the design community did not like Gmail because it isn't beautiful. And some might say that it's not necessarily intuitive until you know how. A little
yeah,
bit like Apple devices, easy when you know how. But what we now know, looking back, is that the product teams and the engineering teams at Google were avidly recording data points.
yeah,
And every decision that they made was based on, is this being used? Is this
yeah,
causing help desk requests? That's what you mean, isn't it?
yeah. And that's a really good way to go about it. I mean, even if you do no other data analysis in your company, just tracking what is causing the most calls to help desk or customer services, and just addressing that. If you don't do anything else in this field, you'll have massively improved customer satisfaction.
Yeah, yeah. And would you say that this is a relatively high percentage of the use case application that we see when folks talk to us about improving their data and AI strategy?
Um, it's partly, I mean, in many ways, I think this is the easy thing to get into because it's only working with data that companies already have. I'm not sure that it's the majority. In fact, oftentimes that happens surprisingly rarely. I think a lot of companies are sitting on a lot of easy wins for themselves that they're just not used to tapping into. So I think there's a lot of easy wins for a lot of companies out there in this area.
Very good. Thank you. All right. And what about what comes next?
So the next step up from that, I guess, is if you have a business plan, but you're trying to figure out the path to get there, again, being data driven or data, there's a temptation in this world to just put data in front of every word you use, which is slightly annoying. So apologies, I'm saying data driven and data informed. Yeah, but sometimes if you're after a specific target, you may find that the logs that you just happen to have collected aren't of sufficient resolution to make the inference that you need. And at that point, you kind of need to step up to the next gear and start figuring out what data you need to record and how you need to record it such that you can be informed. Now, that's
Makes
in
sense.
some ways not harder, but if you're looking for, say, if you're looking for annual patterns or in sales figures, because obviously a lot of companies' sales are seasonal, then if you often need at least one full year to understand the patterns. Many years is better because then you gain confidence that it wasn't just an anomalous year. Well, if you're putting that new data collection in, you've then got, by definition, at least 1 year before you've got a full set of data. So this is it's worth starting to think about this at the start, because the earlier you start collecting the right data, the more data you've got to make inference from. But this, by its nature, is sometimes a slightly long, a more medium-term plan than a quick win. But at that point, you do need to start figuring out what data is important. So, say your Gmail example, they, when they launched with that tracking to figure out what were the pain points for customers, they knew that they weren't going to be able to make it perfect in 2 weeks. They had to wait until they'd got several tens of thousands of users using it month after month after month for those patterns to start to become visible. But because they put that baseline in, they could make sure that with each change they were trending in the right direction.
Yes. Yes.
And that's the important thing. And one of the big things with all of this, with any of the data analysis or AI, it's not about trying to produce one big supercomputer, big bang, that will give you all the answers. It's about unlocking that incremental value step by step as you go along.
Yes, and I can also see that there's an evolving mindset of becoming more aware of data that can be collected and what it means, and making decisions based on that, right?
Absolutely, and there is a language that needs to be learned by the whole company, from engineers through to sales through to management. I mean, yes, you don't all need to get a PhD in statistics, but often the meaning behind it is more than just one word. Take train delays, for example. People don't like delayed trains, but what does a delayed train mean? Is it one service in 10 that's delayed by an hour, or every service that's delayed by 5 minutes? It's yeah, you don't need, not everybody in the company needs the skills to crunch those numbers, but they just need the language to understand the descriptions of each of those variations, and be, have the customer data to drive to the understanding of what's really problematic. Of course, in that particular case, it crosses over from customer satisfaction into operational as well, because if one train arrives really late, you can be fairly certain the next service is going to be hit with a knock-on effect as well. And so it's balancing all of these things, but you
Not to
do
mention
need,
the contact center. Yes.
yeah. But that's the thing. In all of these cases, it's a case of both getting the data, having the expertise to do the analysis, but also having the language such that the result of that can be communicated. Because in oftentimes the result is more than just a simple number. It's a little bit more nuanced than that.
Yeah, yeah. And I think for that reason, we often find ourselves talking to clients about the data transformation that they are embarking on, right? It's not just by this tool, switch on these insights. It's a transformative step-by-step incremental process. Very good. What's the next step up?
So we've spoken currently about data purely. So all of those things you can do with just any technology really. There's nothing, excuse me, there's nothing that I would consider to be machine learning or artificial intelligence in that. You can use those things to vastly improve that, but you can do all that data platforming without any machine learning if you want to. To step up beyond there, you can. That's when I think you do stray into the area where you're definitely going to be using machine learning at some point. To define machine learning, so I don't think we did before. I am Machine learning is often used in the same context of artificial intelligence. Machine learning is just, I define machine learning as um, the cases where the computer programs itself. So you set it a goal, like learn to recognize dogs in a photo, and rather than you describing all the attributes of dogs, four legs, tail, snout, you just give it lots of examples, and the machine trains itself how to do that. So that's what machine learning is. And because AI is so complex, you normally achieve AI via the use of machine learning. So I'll probably use the terms mostly interchangeable for the rest of this, so I apologize in advance. But yeah, so the next thing that you can do is once you've got some data, you can use machine learning and AI to create a new product. If you're I don't know, if you're in running a bakery, for example, and you can track ingredients and flavors of your various products compared with how they sell for time of day or time of year. And if you've got enough fine grained data, i.e., all of the flavors and textures, if you can somehow quantify that to log that in the data for each product, you could use a machine learning model to predict what other new types of things might work, especially if you can get some industry-wide data. There's a great example of a company that did this for real. There's a Swedish whiskey distillery that didn't have the long history of a lot
Did you
of
say
the
Swedish?
Swedish.
Which is not what I expected to hear.
Is it not?
No, I expected to hear Scottish.
Yeah, well, that's the point. They started a new distillery, and they didn't have the long history of Scottish distilleries. So they enlisted some technology help, and they trained an AI model to try and figure out uh, how to shape the recipes to give them a kickstart, and it worked really well. And you can actually buy that whiskey, and it's won some awards. It's but that's a good way to use AI. You use it to do enhanced data analysis, but you then provide the results to human experts in your company, and so it doesn't take over or replace them. Maybe one day it will, but I personally think we're nowhere near that yet. But you use it to just accelerate your analysis. And so you can do in a year what it would otherwise take 10 years or longer to achieve. And you still have that human filtering throughout. And that model can be really beneficial. Once you've got that data in place and you've got your data platform, you can then use the benefit of machine learning and AI is that it's not that it's intelligently reasoning about it, but it can make connections between the data that is quite difficult for humans to see. So if you've got a machine learning model within that pipeline helping to highlight those connections, your human specialists can then make use of that and accelerate their development.
Very good. That makes sense. And the next rung up, I guess, would then be applying the machine learning technology to an existing offering. Is that right?
Yes, absolutely. So the benefit, now in many ways, this seems simpler or a step down from what we've just spoken about. But the what we've just spoken about, because it's going through another human at the end, it can afford to make some mistakes. You've got a correction factor included. Once you've got if you're applying it to a product, then you've got to be confident that it's going to work 99% of the time. So the canonical example of enhancing an existing product is something we've all seen. We've probably all got it in our pocket at the moment, which is smart delete on phone photo apps. So if you take a photo on your phone, somebody's photobombed it unintentionally in the background, you can select them and it will delete it. That is a perfect example of machine learning or artificial intelligence enhancing a product because it's very, very difficult arguably impossible to, or at least infeasibly complicated to write that sort of algorithm in a way that produces photos that the human eye can't detect isn't an unmodified photo with a normal algorithm. You have to use machine learning for that. But obviously, when you're putting that into a product, that's not being run once under the guidance of a human expert. That's going out to thousands or millions of your customers, and they need to be confident that it's going to work. Now, none of them. The thing with machine learning is it's always probabilistic in nature. You can't, with a regular normal bit of software, you can run a test and it will either pass or it will fail, and you will have confidence with the same input it will do that every single time. When you're in the machine learning world, because the inputs are so variable, you can't be 100% certain of exactly how it will react in each case, but you need to have high confidence. And with those photo apps, if you take a photo at the coast on a beach, in a field, against a city backdrop, you will, in almost all cases, not be able to tell the difference. You can trick it, and in particular, if you've got some sort of grid or lattice that the subject is against, you can almost always see where the joins aren't quite right.
Mm.
But that's as good as you can get. But it works in the people who write the apps are confident it works in enough cases that they can run with it. And obviously, even the lattice backgrounds are being improved all the time. So
Makes sense. And there's plenty of application in the financial world and fraud detection, isn't there? That's
yes,
another an anomaly detection is a good use case.
yes, and again, the way that works is the same sort of thing. Those connections are there in the data, but by definition, they're hard to see.
Yes.
And the problem is humans are very good at some things, but holding gigabytes of data in their head to look for all the connections at the same time is not where humans are at their strongest. But computers are brilliant at that. And
Mm.
so having a machine learning model be able to recognize those connections is where you can really get that extra value. It's the same as the sales data. It's nothing more really than the sales data or analyzing customer service calls that we've spoken about before. It's the data, the value is there in that data of those transactions, highlighting which ones are fraudulent. It's just figuring out the technology to identify those connections, and that's where machine learning can be really useful.
Very good. And the next rung up again.
Remind me which one that is.
So the next,
Where? Oh yeah.
yes, so we've applied it to a new specialist product. We've enhanced an existing product, and now we're coming on to what the brochure will tell you.
Right. Okay. So yes, I remember. And this is AI as a personal assistant. Now, this is a little bit different to the others because here we move from specialist artificial intelligence that might be used within your company to generalist. And because it's generalist, this is where it is possible to buy a pre-existing service such as ChatGPT. And that is because the way these sort of generalist or personal assistant things are designed is to aid you in day-to-day tasks. So what they offer facilities like summarize a long document or a news article or a web page. Now you don't need, because you can feed them any article, they don't necessarily need to be specialist AIs for your area. And so ChatGPT, Google Gemini, Copilot from Microsoft, all of those, they're just trained on vast amounts of natural language, which means that you can sort of use those to use that training and that expertise across all of millions and millions of documents. Now that's both good and brings problems as well. So it means that it's if you are writing a general document, it's very, very good at making advice on tone or making it more formal or less formal, or as I say, summarizing a document. Or if you're coding, as it's trained on large numbers of examples of source code, it can help you write code as well by sort of
Write tests
yes,
and
this is
yeah.
a pattern that's been recognized before. Now that's absolutely fine if you are writing something fairly general. It's less good the more specialist that you get. I would imagine if they're not doing it already, that there will come a time when then not too distant future where law firms don't use something like ChatGPT, but have their own legally specialized version of that that's trained purely internally on case history, because that would then because and in the same with the medical world, because the legal standard language, the medical standard language is very different from normal English.
Yes,
So
and also as we've seen in examples in the media, in the legal or the medical use case, it's not as generative
yes,
as language. ChatGPT might give me a sentence that I've never thought of before, perhaps even a sentence that others haven't used before, but
yeah.
I certainly don't want a diagnosis or a piece of case law that isn't directly referenced to something that has been done before.
Yes, exactly. And with any example of artificial intelligence, whether it's a generalist one like ChatGPT or whether it's one that you've created internally for your own company, you need to sort of bear in mind its area of expertise. In a way, it's no different to sort of hiring humans. Everyone's skilled at one thing, you hire them to do that. And yes, humans might grow over time, artificial intelligences won't. But you need to make sure you need to be aware far more so than with a human employee of what their area of expertise is, and don't trust it beyond that. Part of the problem, especially with the generative natural language AIs, is because they are so human conversant, it's very easy to forget what their area of expertise is.
Mm.
Uh, Particularly because they won't tell you. They'll just invent something else that sounds like it fits.
Mm.
But I would say, yeah, if you're getting a generalist AI, then great, use it for calendar management, use it for checking tone. If you're starting out on a new JavaScript library, yes, use a coding AI to help highlight how you should use that AI. But if you're doing something specialist in a certain area, always make sure that you're checking it. There will come a time when these AIs grow, or they're forked off into different specialist areas that, as you say, are less generative. The last thing you want, as you say, is for a medical AI to start inventing conditions that sound really plausible. You want it to sort of not do that. Whereas if you're summarizing a general news article, it doesn't matter so much if it's a brand new sentence, to follow your example, especially if it, you know, makes you think, oh, I hadn't thought about it in that way.
Mm.
It's not that one way is good or bad. It's that some aspects are more suitable for some uses.
Which is
And
just the same as applying technology choices to any
yeah,
situation. I've often
exactly.
heard you describe it as be aware of generative AI failing silently. Do you want to just talk about that briefly?
Yeah. So to, the case I just mentioned, if you all the big currently sort of publicly accessible, I'll call them AI as a service offerings, Gemini, Copilot, and all of that. They won't, at least currently, they won't tell you when you're asking them something outside of their area.
Right.
They will just have a go. So what they can be like in the case where you said there's the case of an AI, a lawyer using an AI, and the AI invented case law. That's a fail, but there's no error message. In you don't get a 500 code back from the service. It looks like everything's worked. It's just that what you get back is utter garbage. And that's a problem if you're using it in a pipeline. If you're using it as a human user, then you've got a chance to catch it, but you need to be aware of the fact that this can and does happen. It doesn't happen all the time. It doesn't even happen the majority of the time, but it happens often enough that you need to be aware of it all the time. It's a much higher failure rate than most people would be comfortable with. I mean, think if you're asking for help to shorten, if you've written a page document and it needs to be a paragraph, and you need help to shorten it, that's a typical example where you may use one of these AIs. Now, if you're doing that manually, if 90% of the time that's fine and 10% you realize it's introduced an error, that's not a problem. But and that's probably about my experience for how often things go wrong. But for any other online service, an error rate of 1 in 10 will be considered unacceptably high. And
Yes.
it kind of shows you really need to keep on your toes, because you will not have any indication that it's gone wrong other than reading it for yourself and double
So it's
checking.
kind of apt. So if we think of the advancement and usability of AI, generative AI as a technology area, it sounds like it's at the human guided level.
Yes, I would say that we're exactly there at the moment. How long it will stay there, I don't know. Obviously, this field is moving very, very quickly.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
And we would be remiss if we didn't talk about the very last, which is the could we build our own? Talk about that for a minute.
in principle, yes. If you really did want to build your own Chat GPT, in principle, there's nothing stopping you doing that, other than the scale and the logistics of it. The amount of data you need to train a natural language model is to train a model from scratch is absolutely vast. And the amount of compute power that you need is vast. And the amount of power that you need to drive that compute power is vast. I keep seeing predictions that the next generation of AI are going to require multiple power stations just for the data center where the AI is being trained.
Wow.
So from a technical point of view, there's nothing stopping anybody having a go, but the scale of it will probably mean it's not really feasible for any except the large companies. Now there is a caveat within that, and that is when I've said building it from scratch. There are actually quite a few open source models, and I believe you can get the earlier GPTs, possibly maybe GPT, the first GPT through or something, as an open source model. I don't know whether that's correct, but you can certainly get open source large language models that people have trained that you can take. Now that offers the very intriguing prospect of doing some fine tuning training,
Mm.
and that's where you take a trained or mostly trained model that's got 80% of the effort put in for training and kind of finish it off yourself. Now that's normally done when you need it to specialize. So the example I made before, if I could imagine the law firms or medical groups doing their own training, I can't imagine that they would start training from scratch because of the scale problem. But I can
Yes.
very much imagine that they would take a pre-trained model and then do some fine-tuned training to specialize it within their particular field and language. Now that's much more attainable.
Yes.
And exactly how much that's going to cost, that very much depends on the level of training that you need to do.
Mm.
But
And the level of
presumably,
accuracy and the amount of generative component, right?
yes, absolutely. Now, yeah, I mean, the hardware is still expensive from the point of view of an individual buying a computer, but from the point of view of a big company buying it's you can call Nvidia and get a £100,000 machine shipped to you, or rent it from Amazon for £10,000 a month, and you can be up and going with that approach. And if you are in that field, you probably already have the data. If you're a big established law firm, you probably have your own internal documents and case history and
Mm.
access to all the legal documents ready to train it on. The problem there is both just paying for the computer to do it, but then and then the other challenge is just validating the accuracy. How
Yeah.
do you know? I mean, we haven't really spoken about
Training
validation
it.
through this, but through all of this, even the data stuff, you've got to have confidence that you're getting the right inferences from things.
Mm.
And it's often something that's not thought about up front when you're planning these things. But for any of these steps throughout, from the beginning, be aware that you need to allocate a good amount of effort, and that normally means time and money, but a good amount of effort into validating that what you're getting out of it is of sufficient accuracy. As I say, artificial intelligence is normally probabilistic. So it's not going to be a case of it works or it doesn't work. It's far more going to be it's accurate 95% of the time, and you get this rate of false negatives and this rate of false positives. And the question is that rate good enough for the case in which you wish to use it?
Yes, yes. Or here's a range of potential patterns that the model has detected in last 5 years renewal rates in this
Yeah,
particular insurance firm. And when we look at it at the last 6 months, here's a couple that might be worth looking into, right?
yeah, absolutely.
So let's
Um,
let's move on to that then. So how do folks go about answering the question from the board or from someone in the leadership team? Have a look at how we could apply AI to our business. If you can find a use case that it's going to increase efficiency, then we'll fund you. How do folks approach that?
so the first thing that they need to do is decide what approach it is that they're going to do. Obviously, the quickest thing to get going right away is just using AI as a personal assistant. Um, because you can basically sign up on the spot and have everybody start using it. You probably need to, if people have never used one before, you probably need to give them a bit of training or at least advice that actually just because it's an AI doesn't mean everything it gives you is absolutely the truth. You need to keep an eye on it and double check that what you're getting makes sense. But to a degree, that's not much different conceptually than just buying some extra software that helps people do their day job more quickly. It doesn't really have any impact in the way your business is run. If you really want to get that, then you need to go to one of the other types that we've looked at because that will make a direct impact on your business.
Mm.
But from there, it depends where you are already in terms of do you already have any AI capability? Are you already doing, do you already consider yourself to be a data-driven company, or are you literally starting out? Taking the sort of worst case example that the companies, no one in the company has ever really thought about this before, so you really are starting from scratch. I'd say to be aware that this is to get to being sort of a strongly AI using company with AI in your products and everything else, it's probably going to be take quite a long time. But the main thing is that you can unlock a lot of value along the way. So and start off with the first couple of points we've spoken about, the data foundations and unlocking the value of your existing data. You will have some data already in your company. Go back to the basics and figure out, are you using that already? If you are going to, if you have a vision that say you've got an app that you want to put an AI components into, but you've never started doing that, you'll need data to train that. The photo apps on the phones, they needed many photographs to train the AIs on to do this. Now, obviously, you can't get that data from your customers, but you can get it from the data that you earn internally. So you need to start off with, are you already collecting that data? If not, you need to start collecting that data. And then we're back to the foundations. Now, if you've got an end goal, such as building an AI component of your product, that might be, that's going to be at least a medium-term goal. But if you've not started this, as you go through this data pipelining, you'll start, if you break it down into sort of small iterative steps, the way you would for any engineering project, you don't need to wait for that 2, 3, 4 years until you've got to the end goal before you start seeing some benefit. You can start getting the benefits of the better data pipeline as you go through, and it will mean that you'll find that even if you've got a specific goal, such as add this to an app, you'll 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 get benefits you hadn't considered along the way as you unlock more and more value and can shape the direction. In fact, you may even find that yes, you've got a goal to put this new feature into this product, but by the time you get there, it's not one product, it's three with different focuses because that's what the data's led you to follow. And you wouldn't have done that without being on that journey.
Great. Okay, that makes sense. So it's although I, as a CTO, might be thinking, wouldn't it be nice to just switch this on in the way that the board have indicated from their reading of the media, and just have AI insights on tap? The reality is, though there is some AI personal assistant use cases that can be explored. Of course, there's governance, there's training around that, which we'll go into, I'm sure, on another episode. But really, it all comes back to being a data problem,
Yeah,
and therefore should be approached in the same way as a normal data problem.
yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Thank you. That's been really interesting. And do you have any final thoughts as we wrap up?
I guess the only thing is this is the storage capacity and compute power we've got at the moment. This is going to become more and more mainstream. And I think just having whether whoever you are in a company, but particularly if you're an engineer, just having a little bit of familiarity with the technology and the terminology around data and machine learning is going to become very, very useful, I think, going forward. In the same way, if you're an engineer, everybody knows what object-oriented programming is. Even if not everybody does it these days, it's part of the background. Nobody, even if you're not an expert at it, and I think data and AI tooling is going to be similar. You won't necessarily, most people won't need to be an expert in it, but I think it's going to become embedded so much in the background. If it's not already, that just having that level of familiarity with it is going to be really, really useful.
Yes. As we all step by step become more data driven, right?
Yeah.
Great. Thank you, Jon. And folks, thank you for listening. If you've got a burning topic that you'd like us to discuss on the show, let us know in comments on Spotify or YouTube. And if you're interested in chatting to us about a challenge you're facing, please reach out at 101ways.com. And we look forward to talking to you again on the next episode. Look after yourselves. Thank you.